diversity is an empowering tool for the person who's wise enough to observe it as it's happening. And I was able to do that on 2 occasions that really helped me evolve, both as a Marine officer and as an academic. As a junior officer, I inherited a group of Marines that were kind of known throughout the battalion as the UN platoon, United Nations platoon. And the reason for that is because, quite frankly, they were misfits and cast-offs from other platoons. And the reason for that, I know now, and I kind of sensed then, was that people didn't understand them. There was a Marine from Thailand, a Marine who had been a South Vietnamese boat person. There was a Marine that was from Ukraine, if I recall correctly. There was a Marine from Alabama, a Marine from Alaska. It was a very diverse group of Marines. And I was very fortunate that I had a platoon guide who was from Alaska, and he was a great leader. And I understood that he was the guy that could influence the platoon. So I approached him and I asked him, some questions. I said, well, do we know about these Marines and where they're from? He said, no, sir, no one's ever asked. So I started asking questions about where they were from, what their story was, and I forced them to tell their stories, to share their stories with the other Marines. And that was the first step. And we had a Marine from Alabama who admitted, and it was difficult for him, he admitted being affiliated with, I would say, probably an offshoot of a neo-Nazi or a Klan organization. And he admitted that in front of everybody, and he basically apologized for it. And he was seeking to use the Marine Corps experience as a way to be a better person. And he, to his great credit, he admitted that. So for me as a junior officer, I saw that, yes, all these people were different. The corporal from Thailand, Corporal T, I can't remember his name now, it's been so many years, he brought us to his house for dinner and cooked, his wife cooked Taiwanese food. It was awesome. And those type of experiences, those cultural extensions are important, and it made for a better platoon. The platoon became successful greatly in part of people becoming more aware of their differences and diversity, but appreciating it, not allowing it to inhibit them, to the leadership of our platoon guide, Sergeant Fairbanks, who was from Alaska, ironically. And I think the fact that I was open to having Marines talk to one another about their differences and learning. Our Marine, I can't remember his name now, again, it's been almost 25 years, who was from South Vietnam, his story of being a boat person and then enlisting in the Marine Corps at age 30, no one had ever asked him that story. And he was one of our best young Marines. He was vicious and brutal when you needed to be vicious and brutal. And he loved America, and he loved the Marine Corps for giving him an opportunity. And he would defend the Marine Corps to his death. And his inspirational story, I think, heightened the effort of everyone else in the platoon once they were aware of it. So that type of diversity, and of course it goes to the lore and the tradition of the military, is that we'll take anybody, the Marine Corps will take anybody, and there's this old saw where the drill instructor says you're all equally worthless. You know, he doesn't care or she doesn't care where you come from as long as you earn the title Marine. And we kind of lived that in my first platoon, and I saw beneficial results as the platoon became better tactically, a more cohesive unit, performed better, and in fact, so much so to the point that other Marines wanted to come to our platoon. And I knew at that point that when Marines were saying, hey, I'd much rather be in that platoon, your platoon, 3rd Herd, and then anyplace else, then I knew that we were being successful. Later on in my life as an academic, one of my earlier teaching experiences was at George Mason University. Now, I didn't know this at the time. George Mason University in Fairfax County is one of the most diverse counties in the United States today, or it was at least when I was teaching there. Great diversity. It's close to Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia metropolitan area, and at that time George Mason was growing quite rapidly in its undergraduate population. So one of my first classes, I had a student from Central America, South America. I had a student from Africa. I can't remember which country now. Had a student from Poland. Had a student from Ukraine. Had a student from Iraq. I mean, it was. I asked at the beginning of the class, I go, "Where are you from?" And we just went around the room, and I said, it was a public communications class. I said, "Okay, your first presentation is your nations, your ethnic heritage, from whatever nation your family's derived from, and tell me a little bit about your family. And it was interesting because students were very prideful, and that was a really great way, turned out, to get them engaged about their own history, their own culture, many of whom were first-generation college students. And they were very proud of the fact, if there was a common denominator amongst these various cultures, it was that they were all proud of the fact that their parents had sacrificed a great deal to put their children in the position to be at George Mason University. And all those students across the board showed that same appreciation. So it was a very diverse group of people whose ethnic heritage was all over the globe, but if that one commonality, and not at my urging, was evidence in their presentations. And I think all the students really appreciated that. And even the ones who didn't fall in that category, but there weren't that many, but there were a few that didn't fall in that category, they were appreciative and understood the sacrifice that their peers' parents had made. And I think if they had taken it for granted, they probably took it a little less for granted after that exposure. So when I was a junior officer in the Marine Corps, I was very fortunate to command the UN platoon, but it helped me tremendously both in my maturation as a person, but also as a Marine officer, because later on I served with many allies from around the world: Poland, Ireland, Iraq, Afghan, Ukraine, from all around the world. So being able to have the maturity to understand that yes, these people are different, but we need to work with them to achieve a common end, set me up for success as a Marine officer. And my understanding of the different cultures and where people were coming from in the classroom made me acutely aware of it at George Mason University, and I've always been a little bit more aware of it, a little bit more sensitive to it as I've taught in other classes. And when students are from around the world, I ask them those questions and tell them, hey, it's important you bring that into the classroom. And now at Immaculata, I teach global communication, so those experiences feed right into that pedagogy where I'm explaining to students, hey, people around the world communicate differently. You need to understand. And I've lived that, having been to Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Liberia, and Detroit. And I say, hey, people talk differently here, here's why. And that's important. So those exposures to diversity have helped me. And then as a PhD student, studying it and reading Dr. Brenda Allen's great book, Difference Matters, just was an incredible experience. And reading what she's written about how we are different physically, how we are different racially, how we are different sexually, how we are different in class, how we are different in gender, how we are different age. She uses those 6 parameters to measure difference. We are different. And once you understand and acknowledge that, then you can look for the sameness. But the first step is to understand and acknowledge that difference. The second step is to seek out that sameness. And if you can have a handle on those 2 things, you'll be very successful.